On today's World Insight with Tian Wei, U.S.-South Korea large-scale military exercises scrapped, a goodwill gesture after the breakdown of the Kim-Trump summit. Kashmir, a flashpoint for India and Pakistan. What could dial back tensions? Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei. The program is coming to you live on CGTN. U.S.-South Korea large-scale military exercises scrapped. A goodwill gesture, some say, after the breakdown of the Kim-Trump summit. And we'll see what exactly is happening with the Korean peninsula, where the United States and South Korea say they will no longer carry out large-scale military exercises. The massive joint drills used to raise tensions on the peninsula for months each year. The military chiefs of the two countries say they have agreed to replace the drills with smaller combat readiness exercises. This comes after the summit between President Trump and DPRK leader Kim Jong Un in Vietnam ended without any agreement. After the summit, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo had phone conversations with China, Japan, and South Korea. Let's take a look.
An olive branch to the DPRK. South Korea and the U.S. are ending their massive springtime military drills as part of efforts to support diplomacy aimed at resolving the DPRK nuclear crisis. The annual drills were one of the world's largest war games and were traditionally held in February or March. The Key Resolve exercise refers to computer-simulated war games against potential DPRK aggression. It ran for about 2 weeks before overlapping with the Full Eagle, a combined field training exercise. Being paired since 2001, the joint drills then ran together for about a month. These annual exercises typically involve thousands of forces for air, ground, and naval field operations. Military forces from Australia, Britain, France, and other countries also took part. Pyongyang has strongly opposed the war games. The decision came 3 days after a high-stakes summit between President Trump and DPRK leader Kim Jong Un in Vietnam, which was cut short without any agreement. Trump tweeted Sunday, "The reason I do not want military drills with South Korea is to save hundreds of millions of dollars for the U.S., for which we are not reimbursed. That was my position long before I became president. Also, reducing tensions with North Korea at this time is a good thing." Critics warned that canceling the large-scale war games could seriously undermine South Korea's defense capabilities. But officials say exercises will continue, just on a much smaller scale, including one called Dongmyeong, which means alliance in English, which will begin on March 4. The joint militaries say the drills will focus on strategic, operational, and tactical aspects of general military operations, but have not yet detailed how many troops will be involved.
We think our combined defensive readiness won't be affected because we will be having combined command center exercises and coordinated outdoor maneuver exercises. We will also be maintaining firm defensive readiness.
She declined to discuss Mr. Trump's comment that he stopped the exercise to save money. The decision reaffirms the allies' willingness to keep the door open for dialogue with the DPRK after the breakdown of the Hanoi summit.
For more on the U.S. and its war games with South Korea, in fact, the scrap off of it, with us in Washington, D.C., Daryl Kimball, the Executive Director of the Arms Control Association. Also in Washington, D.C., David Kim, a former U.S. State Department East Asia and Non-Proliferation official who's a research analyst at the Stimson Center now. And in Beijing, we have Yang Xiyu, a Senior Research Fellow from the China Institute of International Studies. Gentlemen, welcome to our program. I want to start with you, Mr. Kimball. Is the scrap-off of the joint military exercise between Washington and Seoul a big gesture of goodwill from Washington?
Well, I think this is the right move, even though the Hanoi summit didn't produce a result and it was cut short. I mean, this move is intended to show that the United States continues to want to engage in talks on peace and denuclearization. And I must say that the decision to scale back these exercises with the ROK was made several weeks ago. As I understand it from my sources, the decision was made in December. If you think about it, you have to make that kind of decision weeks in advance before these exercises, which were planned for March originally. So I think this move will continue to set a good atmosphere, and it will also help encourage North Korea to sustain its ballistic missile testing and nuclear testing halt, which is also important to maintain the proper atmosphere for the ongoing peace and denuclearization talks.
I see. David, Mr. Kim, you and I were talking to one another during the evening in which the talk between President Trump and Chairman Kim broke down. And many wonder, even with steps like this, apparently a walking back, not rather walk away from the U.S. side to filter opportunities to talk. Will the DPRK really buy this gesture?
I think it's a good move, like Daryl said. We did this after the Singapore summit. The president canceled Ultra Freedom Guardian, and it really helped because the tone of the tensions reduced on the Korean peninsula would help talks in a time of détente. So I think what Daryl is saying is correct. I think this is a proper move for the United States, and it's also helping to maintain really an atmosphere of calm and reduced tensions, and it helps North Korea to continue its halt on ballistic and nuclear missile testing.
But many would argue this is all about beating the bushes, you know? It's like you're not focusing on the real issue, but just talking about minor issues, joint military exercise. But the real issue is denuclearization. The real issue is come up with a joint concept of denuclearization and implement it time step by step. So, Mr. Kimball, is it only decoration once and again? With many steps like this, when are we going to see the so-called denuclearization at all?
Well, I think what we have learned from the Hanoi summit is that for the first time the North Koreans came forward with a specific proposal about the corresponding steps they want the United States to take in exchange for concrete measures on denuclearization. North Korea was looking for relief from most of the most recent sanctions that the UN Security Council has imposed. Donald Trump decided that that was too much of an ask, too big an ask at this time. The U.S. also wanted North Korea to expand its shutdown to cover sites outside of the Yongbyon nuclear complex. So what we saw was an exchange of some ideas, some clarity about the position of each side, and oftentimes negotiations don't occur in a straight line. Sometimes there are setbacks and pauses, and I think both sides are going to have to go back home, evaluate what was discussed in Hanoi, and recalibrate their positions so that they can find a way to get to yes, because I think a deal is possible along the lines of what was discussed in Hanoi, but Donald Trump clearly is not the negotiator to close that kind of deal.
Well, Mr. Yang, of course, we all understand that in any negotiation, you know, there's always the tricks, the strategies, and the zigzagging road toward the eventual consensus. However, Mr. Yang, once again, people would ask, even with these kind of goodwill gesture coming from the United States for now, are we really missing the really big issue, which is now suffering as a result of breakdown of the second round to probably zero and even minus than what it was before the talks?
Yep. Well, I would say by this way, this goodwill gesture will not buy North Korea's concession on the bigger issue, say denuclearization. However, that's designed to let North Korea in confidence or comfortable to continue talks. Yes, Hanoi summit and the extended meetings produce no results. However, there's a potential result. There's a potential results there, and the U.S. really want to continue the talks so that turn the potential results into reality. And meanwhile, going further, say, get detailed consensus on the denuclearization. So that is why they have sent several positive signals, plus the latest decision on the joint drill, so that they can attract North Korea, remain on the track for the dialogues.
I see. On Sunday, Mr. Trump tweeted this. He was ending military exercises with South Korea to save hundreds of millions of dollars. But if you look at the numbers, here's some tricky things. In reality, a similar U.S.-South Korea drill in 2017 only cost $14 million US. This pales in comparison to the $10 billion in increased defense missile spending in 2018, and is tiny given Washington's $700 billion military budget for the year 2018. Okay, so Mr. Kim, we got it. I mean, U.S. wants to show goodwill, and whether it's a big number, a smaller number, this is a gesture at least. But we are talking about trust. So trust which falled back to zero as a result of the breakdown. So how much will this be able to help? Or this is rather a PR stunt coming from Washington at this moment?
Tianwen, I disagree. I think this is not a breakdown, and we're not going back to zero. We're actually building on what President Trump agreed to in Hanoi and in Singapore, and that is to, in line with denuclearization, establish new DPRK relations. And we did this back in 1992. We canceled the Team Spirit exercise when North Korea came to the table and asked for IAEA safeguards protections on Yongbyon. And you know, in a time of détente, it's appropriate to calibrate our approach to be one that is tying military readiness with our strategic aims for diplomacy.
But on the other hand, it is President Trump and also Secretary of State, Mr. Kimball, talk about the several weeks. That's the time frame rather, they mentioned at the press conference. And now days have passed. Nobody mentioned about weeks anymore, which means that ball probably will be kicked further downstream. We do not know how far really it is. So if you tell me it's not zero, where exactly is it?
Well, one of the things that is concerning about the Hanoi summit is that the two sides left that meeting without any clear plan for when they're going to resume the discussions and at what level. You know, as we've seen in past U.S. DPRK negotiations, no agreement is ever worked out in one single meeting. There has to be a sustained, steady pace of discussions, especially at the working level, to work out the important details of exactly how and when, in what sequence, the action-for-action steps are going to be taken. So we don't yet have a scheme for that, and that's one thing that's very worrying, and I hope we'll hear in the next few days about another meeting, perhaps between U.S. Special Envoy Steve Biegun, who has been doing a lot of good work. We need to maintain some momentum here so that, as you say, there's not a long period where there's no discussions between the U.S. and North Korea.
Because once it gets cold, it's really hard to pick it up again, not only for the two countries, but also for the other parties involved in this, because things are really moving fast about other issues. Mr. Yang, about that too. I mean, now you have Chairman Kim took his train back home already, en route, of course, across China as well. You also have the Secretary of State coming from the United States pick up his phone on his way back home, trying to call all these different parties, China, South Korea, Japan as well. Only one party not being contacted, that is Russia. So, Mr. Yang, which really makes us think, why originally this six-party framework existed. Some suggest it was because of lack of trust between Pyongyang and Washington to begin with, and therefore there has to be other parties involved to be the middleman.
Yep.
so that the two sides will not break down often and could always keep the temperature at a certain degree. Of course, the other parties will have their own concerns in the issue. That's another issue. But so now it is about bilateral.
Yep.
And people applaud that once it happens, right? But the question is, what if it breaks down? Who are going to repair the breakdown and pick it up again? And from here, where we are, to next meeting, what's going to be the job for everybody? Is there any consensus about this? I mean, this is really, you know, a lot of drama that's good enough for TV, but not good enough for the issue at all.
Yeah. Actually, the question you mentioned are really a great but a very difficult question facing all the related parties and facing the international community. Let's look back the history longer than you mentioned. Originally, the denuclearization negotiations was held really in bilateral between the US and the DPRK, and they produced a lot, including the Green Framework and many others, and failed. And that indicated, oh, bilateral won't be workable, so let's go multilateral. And then we have a multilateral Sixparty talks, and failed again. And North Korea said Sixparty talks has died, and North Korea prefer the bilateral. And with new changes in every capital, say Washington D.C., Pyongyang, and Seoul.
Yes.
Every capital changed a lot, and then they returned to the bilateral. But this bilateral is version 2.0. Not because besides bilateral between U.S. and DPRK, but also bilateral between the two Koreas, and bilateral between Korea and North Korea and China.
Right.
So we have seen the three parallel bilateral summits frequently. However, the key question remains unsolved. Say, who can repair and guarantee the bilateral between the U.S. and North Korea?
Right.
There are no any trusts between the two. So that is the reason why this time we cannot they cannot get a declaration, and even no timeline for the next round of meeting.
But time is very important, as all of you know very well, gentlemen. I know you've been doing research and working things about this for decades. Look at you. I mean, you've been devoting so much effort, and this is what we have got. Mr. Kim, I want to go to you about that, too. I mean, for now, you can see that we are at a critical juncture. Whether we catch this opportunity or we're going to miss this opportunity. We had that before, we missed it. And this time, once and again. And it is also happening when North Korea, DPRK, has already become a nuclear state, which means if you don't have an agreement and step by step to denuclearize, that country is going to increase its nuclear capabilities, possibly in the near future. And that will be a totally changing of nature of this question. Meanwhile, you have geopolitics going on, even between China and the United States. So we're not sure where that relation is going. So are the relationship among the other parties we mentioned. So, Mr. Kim, once we have this momentum, if we don't get it, we are going to miss a lot. Mr. Kim, is there something that all parties, or at least concerned parties, can do now?
You know, I think it's a question now of allowing our negotiators to negotiate, but also we saw today in President Moon's first National Security Council meeting that he wants to play a bigger role and a more explicit role, not a background role. You know, President Moon, we have to give him credit because he was the one who brokered the Singapore talks and really started to continue to bring everyone together from the beginning. So it's his diplomatic masterstroke that brought folks to the table. But it is important. We have to keep our allies, Japan. We have to keep a signatory China involved and Russia in the future. So this is going to require a multilateral effort. But right now, I think this bilateral negotiation to really build trust is very important, and we really have to build the confidence. And so these canceling of exercises, you can see this as really the epitome of confidence building, a CBM, a confidence building measure, and I think it's the right approach.
I see. Mr. Kimball, your thought?
Well, in these negotiations, we do have to seize the opportunity to reach a good deal, a win-win deal. I think you're right that we don't necessarily have a lot of time, and that President Trump and Kim Jong Un need to act with urgency, not desperation, but urgency. So I think the other parties in the region, the other countries in the region, particularly China and South Korea, they can play a helpful role in encouraging President Trump and Chairman Kim in their private conversations at the foreign ministerial levels, the head of state level, to get to yes, and to encourage the U.S. and North Korea not to go for maximalist positions, but to find practical ways to compromise to bring the two positions of the U.S. and North Korea closer together so that we can, at the very least, get a deal that shuts down Yongbyon and North Korea's weapons production in exchange for some limited sanctions relief and perhaps a political declaration on the end of the Korean War.
Right. Mr. Yang, before we go, I want to get to you as well. Chinese foreign minister, on the day when the second round broke down, talk about this deep water zone of the denuclearization issue. Of course, he's trying to, give more courage to different parties, even though it met its difficulties so far. But Mr. Yang, from Chinese side, what do you think all parties involved can be doing for a moment so that we can really take that deep breath and survive this deep water zone?
Well, I think firstly, this is the process based on the US DPRK bilateral engagement, but should be supported, endorsed, and guaranteed by the multilateral. So bilateral plus multilateral. And secondly, the key question are parallel items, say repair and the guarantee. What if the DPRK and the US fail to make a deal that will damage the relation? Then we need a mechanism of repairing. And what if DPRK and the US make a deal between the two, no trust? And then we need a multilateral guarantee. So basically, all the parties should make joint efforts to think about that, say, multilateral mechanism supporting the bilateral engagement and the multilateral rules for repairing and the guarantee.
Fascinating stuff. Very interesting discussion. Thank you so much, the three of you, for joining us and providing your insights and still give courage on this ongoing process. Thank you so much, Yang Xiyu, Daryl Kimball, David Kim. Really appreciate it, gentlemen, for being with us.